The abuse wasn't my fault, but the responsibility to heal is mine. It took me a long time to get my head around that and to accept it. It seemed so unfair. Here I was, a young man in my teens, having to heal and address the hurt from my past. Meanwhile, everybody else that I knew were off living their lives, building careers, getting jobs, going to university, heading overseas, finishing school. And I was lumped with the burden of having to heal. I didn't have a choice. I was deemed a threat to myself and to others. I had lost lots of friends to suicide and accidents, and I was going to end up either dead or in prison. I had to heal. It was like someone had given me a spade and a wheelbarrow and said, "Tim, you see that mountain over there? Now, using that spade and the wheelbarrow, I want you to shift that mountain over to here." What? That's going to take forever. Meanwhile, everybody else I know was living life. They're getting out there and doing things. It seemed so wrong and so unfair that I was hurt and I had to take responsibility for the healing. Well, I got good at moving mountains. As a young man, I ended up in intense psychotherapy for a very long time to address my past. I avoided drugs and alcohol. One thing my parents showed me was that when you're under the influence of something like that, you're more likely to hurt the people around you. And that wasn't me. I didn't want to be that person. So I avoided it. However, what I did do was I would binge eat. So I would go into sugar and salty foods, KFC, chips, chocolate, you name it, lollies, sweets, anything. I would binge eat. And I thought that I was doing okay because I wasn't going into the alcohol and drugs. But health-wise, and even equilibrium, saying balanced, I wasn't doing that. Too much sugar, too much salt, certainly not good for the body. The other thing I was doing was I just couldn't stay still. I was going from relationship to relationship, job to job. A lot of the time I would only last for 3 months before I moved on. I was struggling to cope. Everybody else my age seemed to be out enjoying themselves, going to parties, just having fun, really enjoying their youth. I didn't get to do that. I couldn't even sit still. I was so traumatized from my past. When I was kicked out of high school, after I had gone to them for help, see, every time I say a part of the story, I've got to backtrack a bit because there's things to fill in. I approached my high school for help. I told them what was happening at home. Things were getting pretty severe. I mean, my stepdad had faced me with a knife and threatened to kill me. And he was legit. He was serious. He was already beating me nightly as it was. There'd always been tension and there'd always been times of implosion. Now this was coming to the end of my mother and my stepfather's relationship. So it was really heightened, really intense. And I approached my school for help. I told them, I'm not doing so well at school. I can't focus because of what's happening at home. That's what happens to traumatized kids. They didn't know what to do with me. So the next incident that happened that I was involved in, they took that opportunity to kick me out. I guess it was a sign of the times. I don't think it's changed much. I actually think a lot of adults don't know what to do with kids who have been traumatized. When I got kicked out of school, I was so delayed in my learning because of the trauma, because I was in survival mode. I was not thriving. At that age, I could not tell the time on analog clocks, the clocks with hands. I could not recite the alphabet from A to Z, A, B, C, D, E, F, G. I did not know my times tables. I was delayed. It wasn't because I wasn't a clever kid. It was because of the trauma. I was really unsettled. Whenever I sat next to someone, I didn't know how to behave. I didn't know how to talk to people. I questioned everything I did, even walking in front of others, I'd question, am I okay? Am I doing all right? Because I was trying to just to blend in and not get noticed. And because of that, I got noticed more. It was just this constant rumbling within me, this intensity, this discomfort. I couldn't even sleep at night. A lot of the time I had to sleep with a light on and a weapon close to my bed. I did martial arts. I'd have the nunchucks next to my bed, or a sword, or some sort of stick or other weapon. And I would get triggered very easily with stuff. In a state of constant anxiety, I really needed help. What was amazing too was that everybody took my parents' side. Here I was, this traumatized, abused kid, and the adult's way of dealing with it was that it was my fault. I was a bad kid. That's how I was seen. So extended family knew about the violence and abuse in my home. Although some of them to this day swear that they didn't. But they did. They were there sometimes. They witnessed it. Some of them even did it. They did things. And the community knew. People were at our house a lot. Our house was a bit of a party house at times. And so there was constantly people coming in and out of the house. They saw the abuse. My sister had her birthday party. Oh my goodness. She was, 13? And she had this birthday party. It exploded. It became such a high intensity drama and violence. And there were so many family present and people in the community. They witnessed, they saw, they knew. But because it was so difficult in their mind to address, this includes the local police too, they were well aware. But because of, I guess, the complexity of having to deal with it, they joined my parents in labelling me as this bad kid. And that made me become a bad kid. That put me in a position of trouble. It was like, well, this is who I am. This is how people see me. And I started to live it. But I couldn't settle. I couldn't even just be by myself. I couldn't be with myself. I believe it's a good thing that I did avoid drugs and alcohol, because I would certainly have ended up in a lot of trouble if I hadn't. Taking on those other behaviours though, of eating bad food and constantly moving from job to job and relationship to relationship, took its toll and did a lot of damage. My kids know full well the ongoing impact of childhood trauma and that violence and the abuse. They have witnessed it, sadly. They have done really well. I'm so proud of my kids, which means I did well as a parent, which is awesome. And that's why you'll find I do parenting videos as well as videos like this in regards to dealing with trauma, but also those parenting videos so that we don't make the same mistakes. That was big for me, and that's what Warrior Kids was all about. It was about reaching out and helping kids like me, reaching them and families who wanted to change, because you have to want to change. You have to want it. I mean, I was so determined. I did an intense amount of therapy as a teenager, as a young man, and into my 20s. And then there were times where I'd take breaks and come back again. You know, I'd go for a certain while and then something else would happen. There would be some change in me or some other trigger that made me aware of some even deeper hurt. It was very easy to talk about the physical violence and abuse, the hitting. That was number one. That was right there. You know, when Dad had picked me up as a small child and thrown me around the lounge, you know, thrown me against the wall, thrown me over the furniture, you know, he thumped me so hard that a lump had come up under my arm. That stuff was easy to talk about. When my mum lost it and lashed out with whatever was in her hand, a dog collar, belt, that was easy to talk about. Then came that level of the psychological harm. and not being wanted. It was real obvious to me that my parents, they did not want me. And if they'd had the chance, they would have seen that I hadn't even been born. But I think because of pressure from church and family members, extended family, at that time, my mum saw the labour through. So really coming to terms with not being wanted and the psychological abuse. My mum was very good at it, making me feel that I was the guilty one, that I was bad, and indebted to her. It was like in layers. So the first was the physical to deal with, then the psychological and the whole unwanted thing, and just the mind games. And the next level, that took me a lot to really understand and to even find a therapist that was willing to go there with me, was the sexual abuse. That was difficult to look at, complex, because you've really got to separate yourself from the act, from the perpetrator, the person that's doing the abuse, and their psychological games. There were things I didn't want to remember, things that I would have preferred to have blanked out. But the burden of healing fell to me. And it's been a lifelong journey that I've been on it. I've shared a lot of it through my writing and my work with Warrior Kids and my talks, in the hope that others will be able to get in there and start doing the work. I mean, I started it as a teenager, and the long reach of that trauma has, I would say, there are parts that are still there. It's just the way I am. It moulded me, became part of my identity. And so even to today, there are strands of it still there. I've healed a lot. I've done a lot of work. I'm in a very safe place with myself. I'm in control. I've done really well. I've had huge success, but let's not kid around. What I went through as a kid has lasted all this time. The influence is still there. You can see it in my work. You can see it even in this talk. The influence is still there. The way I raised my kids, making sure they never experienced anything like I did, shows that it's still there. However, I did move that mountain, and my kids and my life are living proof that we can heal and move beyond that violence and abuse, that we can break that cycle, which I have done. I encourage you to take some time and be with yourself and to heal. There is no greater accomplishment. It's about caring and nurturing ourselves, questioning our behaviours and the choices that we make, and ensuring that our life is not being directed by the hurt child within us, that it's not being driven, that wounded child isn't at the steering wheel of our life, so that we can make constructive, progressive decisions for our lives instead of constantly going into self-sabotage and destroying everything we try to build around us. That act of self-sabotage is the child, the wounded child within us, calling out for help, and we need to stop and take notice. Healing from my past has meant that I've been able to move on and create a safe environment to raise my kids, a safe environment for my wife and for myself. It has put me in a position where I was able to work constructively for my life without sabotaging myself, that I was able to create a Warrior Kids program, become an award-winning author, an inspirational speaker. The proof is in the outcomes. It shows that time that I took into healing has been worthwhile and has certainly paid off in helping others to overcome and to move on and break the cycle of the violence and abuse in their own lives. So I strongly recommend it. There's actually no other way. For me, it was a matter of either death or prison. Death, prison, or healing. I made the right choice.